Right. Whew. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday. It's a rainy day in Vancouver, as it often is. But that's okay. Spring will come. Actually, this is good because hopefully what will happen is everything will get wet, and then the weather will warm up, and leaves will pop out, and flowers, and it'll be the whole thing. Hopefully. What's that?
Why today?
Well, why today? What do you mean, why today?
Because it's our last day of soccer.
It's your last day. Oh, it's your last day of soccer, and it's really wet. Are you guys gonna play anyway? Of course. Yeah. You're not wimps. You're gonna go out there and.
Last day, you can miss it. Even if it was a normal day.
Okay. Sorry, you're gonna be wet. Just run extra fast, and then you'll stay warm. What's that?
Extra wet.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry about the rain. Let's see. Okay, so Hadil is here. Good morning, Hadil, and Irene is here. Good morning to you, Irene. Let's go back to Aroma. So, you ready there? Ready there, soccer players? Football, sorry, soccer. Come on. Nobody plays soccer. Is what?
With socks on.
With socks on. I don't know why. I don't know where that word comes from.
Soccer.
Yeah.
American.
It's American.
So you can expect anything.
Fair. It's true. I thought it was the British. The British are always the ones that have weird names for everything, but in this case it's...
That's strange.
Yeah, that is strange. Okay, so here we are in Rome. As we were talking about yesterday, we're coming to the end of the Republic, and it is wild and crazy, right? Everything, kind of the traditions of Rome, the traditional values, the way that the Republic works, all of those things have kind of been thrown out the window in favor of generals, Roman generals, and sort of wealthy politicians basically doing what they want, right? Doing whatever they want and using the state itself, using the Roman state to basically enrich themselves and empower themselves, right? So it's an era of greed, it's an era of violence, it's an era where, money is pouring into Rome, but not necessarily into the city or into, the vast majority of people. It's really pouring into the pockets of the most wealthy and the most powerful, right? So we said, of course, this was the traditional Roman Republic structure, right? This is how the Republic was supposed to work. And again, it was supposed to encourage people to serve Rome, to sort of be elected, to kind of rise up through the ranks. And you would think that if this system is working well, really only the best people would ever become consul, right? Because you have to serve in the army for 10 years. You'd have to sort of hold all of these different magistracies, right? And you'd have to get elected to them. So people would have to support you. And so all the way through until you finally became consul. And so consul was a prestigious position, but in theory, it would only be held by, the wisest, the oldest, the most well-respected Romans would become consul, right? Because it's so competitive. But as we kind of talked about yesterday, that's not really happening anymore because people are getting consulships and other magistracies basically by extorting them, right? By threatening violence or by, trading favors with their other political cronies to get what they want. And Gaius Marius is kind of one of these, right? Marius manages to get himself elected as consul 7 times in a row, right? Again, that should never happen, but it's happening here in the late Republic. We also said that he reforms the military in a number of ways. He creates a professional military that is an arm of the state, which is kind of a normal thing for modern states, but for ancient states it wasn't a normal thing until Marius kind of made it that way. But we said that he made generals responsible for providing land to their troops on retirement. And again, that was a huge incentive because there were a lot of Romans who didn't own any land, right? And so here, with the military, with this professional military, suddenly you had a path, right? So if you were a poor Roman who had no land and no prospects, you could join the military. You could work your way through the military, and if you managed to not get killed in all these campaigns, you could retire and actually get land, right? You could be granted land of your own. And, for a poor Roman in this period, that was probably the only way to kind of financial security, right? If you weren't a patrician, if you didn't come from money, if you didn't have some sort of skill that you could, market to people, if you were just a regular person, a regular Joe, this was your path to security, right? Join the military and you could be granted land at the end, right? And so we said that it's a well-meaning reform, but it kind of backfires because it creates armies that are loyal to their generals, not to the state. And again, you never want an army who is loyal to the leader. You want an army that is loyal to the state itself. We don't want the Canadian, well, it doesn't matter with the Canadian military because they're kind of small, but you don't want the Canadian military being, serving the interests of Justin Trudeau, right? You want them serving the interests of Canada. And so that kind of backfires a little bit on Marius, and it backfires with this guy here, Sulla, right, who's a consul at the same time, wants to sort of gain the command against this Mithridates guy out in Asia Minor. Marius tries to block him from getting it, but Sulla marches in with his army and takes it back, right? And again, this is a Roman general marching on Rome and basically holding the Senate hostage, saying, give me what I want, and then getting it, right? We said he went off, he beat Mithridates, he got lots of money, but then again, he came back and went on a bit of a reign of terror, right? He put up a list in public saying, these are all the enemies of the state, not enemies of the state, they're Sulla's enemies, but these are the enemies of the state, and round them up so they may be executed. And they were, right? And so, again, the sort of machinery of the Republic, the way it's supposed to work, is just being ignored, right? Because these guys are just coming in and doing whatever they want, and nobody can stop them. Right, so I've got a little bit of extra detail here that talks about Marius and Sulla, and Pompey does the same thing. Pompey is one of Sulla's soldiers in command. They call him Pompey the Great because he's such a good soldier, I guess. But he's quite young and he does the same thing, right? So after Sulla retires, Pompey gains military glory. He has a big loyal army behind him, and he marches in and does whatever he wants as well, right? He gains the consulship by basically putting the sword to the throat of the Senate, saying, appoint me consul, which they do. And again, he has no political experience. He's a young guy, and of course he's forcing the Senate to do this, right? And yeah, that's not a republic anymore. I don't know what you have, but when you have army generals dictating who gets to be consul, the republic is kind of over already. But it's kind of limping along here until we get to this guy, Caesar, right? And we said that Caesar's not, I don't know that Caesar's any better or worse than any of these other guys, but he's kind of at the place where the whole thing unravels. And so, he's very historically significant for that reason, but he's also a pretty remarkable guy. And what kind of things did we hear about him in the video yesterday? Do you remember? Mm-hmm. That's pretty remarkable, right? Most people only get stabbed by one, but he had 60 people stabbing him. That's true. What else did we? But like, what kind of a person was he? What's that?
A lot known by his people.
Yeah, he actually, there were a lot of people who supported him and liked him, right? Again, he made a name for himself as a lawyer, as a magistrate, as a Pontifex Maximus. He was kind of a known person in Rome. People knew who Caesar was. And a lot of people thought he was kind of a cool dude, right? When he was up in Gaul, when he was fighting against the Gauls up there for 10 years, he actually wrote a book about what was going on. He wrote the story of his exploits in Gaul. It's called Caesar in Gaul. You can still read it today if you want. It was actually required reading in one of my, which course was it? Maybe it was late Roman Republic 2 or something like that. One of the classes I took in university, that was required reading. So you can still read Caesar in Gaul, and you can read in his own words what he was doing. And the Romans did too, right? The Romans read this book and were like, wow, this guy Caesar is something else, right? Which he seems to have been. The thing they were talking about in the video, where he was fighting the Gauls and he drove them into a hillside fortress, right? So city on the top of a hill with a wall. Caesar's attacking the Gauls and he's outside the walls trying to get at the Gauls who are on the inside. But then the Gauls approach from behind him. And so I had a video about this, but we won't watch it. But he and his troops actually build a wall around where they are. And so I'm actually going to do this. So online people, you're probably not going to be able to see this. But so the city's here. These are probably dead, because nobody's used them in 100 years. Oh, good, okay. So the city is there, and it's got walls around it, and the Gauls are inside, kind of hiding out. And so Caesar and his troops approach from the outside and are trying to sort of get into the city to kill all the Gauls. But then the Gauls come at the Romans from behind. And so Caesar and his troops actually build a wall around themselves. And so they wall themselves in. And so now they're trying to fight at the Gauls here, but they're also sort of repelling the Gauls who are trying to get in at them. And so that's what that army general was saying. He's conducting a siege in two directions. And so again, instead of running away or just being killed, the Romans wall themselves in and they're fighting on both sides. And he wins. So, yeah, insanity, right? Total insanity. But this is, I guess, that's kind of the kind of guy you're dealing with here. So smart guy, very kind of intense, very dedicated, but also kind of loved by his troops, right? They said that he, ate the same food as his troops. He slept on the ground with them. He marched into battle with them. And again, that goes a long way toward, endearing him toward his men, right? He's their leader and they look up to him, but he doesn't put himself above everyone else either, right? He acts like one of the troops. We read this section here. We said that before all that happened in Gaul, these three guys kind of teamed up, and they're all aspiring politicians and military generals. We've got Crassus over there, the oldest and richest of the three. Lots of military glory, lots of political experience, probably the richest guy in Rome. Teaming up with Pompey, who is also consul, but has a large army behind him and has amassed a lot of wealth. And then we have Caesar, who's kind of an up and coming politician. Again, he's a lawyer and Pontifex Maximus, and he becomes consul. Caesar becomes consul as well. And so these three kind of team up in order to help each other out, right? So Crassus is a former consul, but he's in the Senate. Pompey is a consul. Julius Caesar gets himself appointed consul. And so they all agree to help each other out, right? You scratch my back, I scratch yours, right? You help me get elected consul, I'll give you those tax breaks you want, right? You give me those tax breaks, as consul, and I'll give you command against this, threat to the Roman Republic, and you can make yourself more rich. Or, I know your men need land, so help me do this, and I'll help you get some land. And so they're all kind of helping each other out behind the scenes, right? And again, it's all very corrupt, right? There's lots of sort of corruption going on here between these three. Yes, and that's how Caesar gets that command in Gaul in the first place, right? Through this alliance of three, he manages to get himself appointed the governor of those three provinces to the north of Italy. That's where he goes to be governor, but really he kind of starts a war with the Gauls and fights them for 10 years, right? Apparently killing up to 1 million Gauls, which is kind of a lot, right? Especially since there's only one reason he's doing it. He's just doing it for glory, right? He's just doing it so that he will have more kind of political prestige when he comes back to Rome. He doesn't really care about the Gauls, right? So unfortunately for them. So Caesar's out there in Gaul fighting away, getting military glory, writing a book and sending it back to the Romans who can read it and see what a hero he actually is. But toward the end of that, we know that the triumvirate comes apart, right? Crassus gets killed in battle. He's out fighting the Parthians. Caesar's daughter Julia dies, and she was married to Pompey. And again, apparently, they were very much in love, even though it was a political marriage. But as it turned out, they really liked each other. And so the triumvirate comes apart. Pompey becomes an enemy of Caesar, and at the end of Caesar's command in Gaul, the Senate sends word to Caesar and says, "Okay, Caesar, your commission is over. Come back to Rome," right? Which again would be a normal thing in normal times, right? It would be, okay, you're done. Your tour of duty is over. Come on home, right? But this is a tricky situation for Caesar, right? We said that he is in a lot of debt currently, but also he's got a lot of enemies in Rome, all of Pompey's followers, right? And so Caesar worries that if he comes back and just walks into Rome as a normal man, which he would, he's going to get murdered in the street, which again is that's not an unreasonable fear. Lots of people are getting murdered in the streets for political reasons. And so it's probably not a good idea for him, right? And so, again, he doesn't have a lot of choices here. I guess he can just run away and try to hide, or he can come back and just hope he's not murdered. But instead, he takes option C here, right? He doesn't surrender his army. He instead marches in to Rome to attack Pompey, right? And so Pompey and Caesar fight it out for a number of years. Pompey has to kind of flee. He flees to Macedonia. Caesar follows him there. Pompey later flees to Egypt. He gets himself assassinated. Caesar hooks up with Cleopatra, the Cleopatra, and Pompey is defeated, right? And so that kind of leaves Caesar as the most powerful man in Rome. And so when he comes back, he's basically the guy in charge. I mentioned this here, this will come back later, but somewhere around this time, Caesar adds an heir to his will. And so Caesar has no legitimate sons, so he has no sons from his wife. I'm actually not sure who his wife is, to be honest. But he has no sons from his wife. He has a kid with Cleopatra, but they're not married, so he's not a legitimate son. So in his will, he leaves everything to his grandnephew, this kid called Gaius Octavius. And so at the time of the will, Gaius Octavius is probably about 15 years old, maybe 14. He's a kid. So Caesar kind of puts him in his will and then continues on. Caesar, of course, as I mentioned, is a pretty good administrator, right? So he comes back to Rome and he actually does a reasonably good job. He does things that people like. And so for the most part, he's a good administrator. But in the process, he makes himself dictator perpetuo, right? Dictator in perpetuity, forever, right? Again, there's not supposed to be any such thing in the Roman Republic. You're supposed to be elected dictator, and you're only supposed to be elected for 6 months. But here, Julius Caesar is going to be dictator for life, right? And that's kind of, sorry, I'm going to jump here. And that's kind of, yeah. And that's kind of the last straw for a group of Roman senators, right? They feel that Caesar is trying to make himself king or some such thing. I described that thing that happened at the Lupercal, right, with Mark Antony trying to put the crown on Caesar, and Caesar's like, no, I will not take it, right? And so, again, I'm not sure what Caesar was trying to do there, but the senators get very nervous that he's going to try and crown himself a king in some way, and so they all get together and, brutally stab him to death on the floor of the Senate, right? And I said that afterwards, the senators emerge from the Senate and they say, we have restored the Republic, right? Which is a ridiculous statement because they have done no such thing, right? They've simply assassinated a man who had a lot of power in Rome, and now nobody has that power, which means that a bunch of other men are going to try to grab that power while it's available. And so, again, civil war ensues, right? And so the Romans, of course, don't celebrate the death of Caesar. The Romans are actually PO'd about it, to be honest. And so the senators think they've restored the Republic. Really, all they've done is create another civil war, which is exactly what happens. The Romans are annoyed. They actually, a little bit later on, the Romans actually start to worship Caesar as a god. And so there's actually a temple of Julius Caesar that is constructed. And so, which tells you how much the Roman people actually liked Caesar, even if the senators did not. So the temple of Caesar was erected a few years later, and the ruins of it are still there. If you want to go to the ruins of the temple of Caesar, you can do so in Rome. Right. So Caesar is dead. He's murdered. The senators say that they've restored the Republic. They have not. It's still a broken mess. And again, a civil war breaks out. But we'll get to that in a second. I just wanted to show you this short video, 2 short videos actually, and I'm going to post them in, good morning. I'm just going to post them in Microsoft Teams here for online people. And so the first video talks a little bit about, it's kind of trying to understand the legacy of who Caesar was, right? Because he's still someone that we talk about today, right? I asked you, have you ever heard of him? Everyone had heard of him, right? He is historically noteworthy, right? But how should we see this guy, right? How should we remember him? Is he a brutal dictator? Is he a good administrator? Is he someone who was just caught in the sort of crazy times of late Republic Rome and did his best? Is he a genocidal maniac for murdering 1 million Gauls in his military campaigns? Is he a brilliant guy, or is he just lucky? What's the legacy of this guy? Well, how should we think about him? And so that's what I'll ask you to do here is the short video. What kind of man was he? What happened after the vicious attack on Caesar? I think we kind of already know that, but and why do we? This is a piece of history that's very famous, right? People know about the murder of Caesar. People know about the Ides of March. The Ides is kind of like the halfway point of March. Beware the Ides of March is what the oracle told Caesar prior to his death. So his death was actually foretold by an oracle. She said, beware the Ides of March, to which Caesar replied, whatever. I don't know if he said that. But he kind of discounted it. He didn't pay attention to the oracle. But yeah, this is something that we still think about and we still is part of our consciousness. And so why is that? Why do we still pay attention to Caesar? Okay. So watch the first video and then we'll answer the questions. And then watch the second video too. I'll show it to you. It's just a bit of a bonus. Okay. But it's interesting to watch. Okay. So online people, I'll turn you loose to watch those 2 videos and then we'll come back and we'll talk about these questions. Okay. Okay. So actually, let's start in the reverse. So in that little speech, in that little soliloquy or whatever from Mark Antony, what's he kind of trying to say? Like what's his message? What, like, sum up what he was saying if you can. I know it's tricky because Shakespearean language is complex, but what's that?
You killed our pride.
Yeah, why do you say that? You killed our pride.
You are the one who brought power. He had satisfied what people needed. Even though he was beneficial, he's taking power of that. There's no right.
Yeah, no, that's true, right? He's kind of saying that, Caesar actually did good things, right? He is, he says, yeah, when the poor cried, Caesar wept, right? He gave things to people. He cared about people. He did things for people, and you all loved him, right? But now here he is dead, right? What else is he trying to say? That's definitely part of the message, right? That's a part of the message. What do you think? What message is he sending about Brutus?
Isn't he the guy who at first Caesar make him his own copy?
Yeah.
That he knows the power, he knows who he is supporting you. How shame of you do that?
Yeah. So Caesar took care of Brutus, right? Brutus sided against Caesar in the war with Pompey, and instead of executing him, Caesar said, "No, we're not going to execute this guy. You are forgiven. You are pardoned." And then he kind of promoted him, right? He gave him power within Caesar's kind of inner circle, and then Brutus conspired and helped to murder Caesar, right? And so what's Mark Antony saying here? He says, you all say Caesar was ambitious, okay? You all said Caesar was ambitious, and I'm not sure that this is ambition, right? When the poor cry, Caesar cried as well. That doesn't sound ambitious to me, right? He took care of everyone. That's not ambitious. But Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man, right? Is he saying that Brutus is an honorable man?
No.
Not quite, right? He's saying it, but does he mean that? No, because he keeps coming back to it, right? And surely Brutus is an honorable man, right? And so he's obviously not seeing a lot of honor in Brutus's actions, right? But I don't know. Great performance. So maybe let's go on to question 3, because we've talked about these other two things, but why do we still pay attention to the story of Caesar? What is there that people find interesting about this 2,000-year-old story?
So many changes and came over.
Somebody that
So many changes and came over. Like the Roman Republic was going in a way that is reshaped completely different way from his own interest.
okay, so I guess Caesar's story is one of success, right? He kind of, he's from a reasonably noble family, like it's an okay family. He's stripped of all his wealth, but he climbs the political ladder, right? He gains military glory. He makes himself the most powerful man in Rome, and seems to do some good things with it, right? So I guess there's a bit of a success story there for Caesar, right? He undoubtedly he works hard in order to succeed. I can't imagine that 10 years of war out on the frontier is an easy thing 2,000 years ago, does it? Why else do you think people pay attention to this story? You think it's impressive that he got stabbed by that many people? He absolutely did, right? It's a very spectacular political assassination, right? To be killed by the senators on the Senate floor, being stabbed to death. That's a pretty spectacular, noticeable action. What else?
Probably one of the leaders, like the first leaders to get the favor of his own people. You never mentioned that before.
Okay, so yeah, it's probably something that we haven't talked about too much in this course, and maybe it has something to do with the sort of nature of other societies, and it might have to do with the availability of written records here from Rome. But yeah, we haven't really talked about a leader that inspired that much loyalty and respect and love from the people, right? That's something that hasn't really come up before. So that's interesting. Yeah. If this was a myth, and it's not, it's historical fact, but if it was a myth, is there a lesson for us to learn here? From anywhere, I guess. Right. So the video points out the moral struggle or the ethical decision that Brutus has to make. Right. What's his struggle? What's the difficulty for him? Yeah, and why is it difficult? Seems like it, right? The video portrays Caesar as almost like a mentor or a father figure to Brutus, but why does he? What's on the other hand? Why should he kill him? Yeah, he's afraid he's going to become a dictator. He's afraid he's going to exercise full power over Rome and basically destroy the republic that is Rome, right? And again, we said one of the values at the beginning was that Rome comes before all else, right? The founding myth of Rome was that, you may need to even kill your own brother to protect the walls of Rome. And if so, you will do it, right? That was at the heart of that Remus and Romulus story. And so here, Brutus is kind of caught up in that decision, right? Do you think Jared Kushner ever thought about assassinating Donald Trump? You think so? I'm sure some people did, but do you think Jared Kushner ever did? His son-in-law, husband of his daughter.
Yes. Say 80%.
80%?
Yeah.
Interesting. That would be quite something, though, would it not? Again, to compare ancient events to modern ones, wouldn't it be quite something if Jared Kushner got together with a bunch of Democratic senators and conspired and actually murdered Donald Trump, stabbing him to death on the Senate floor? Can you imagine that? Unbelievable, right? But again, this is what I'm trying to communicate. These are crazy events, right? Crazy events. Um, yeah, it's an interesting story, and I think one of the things is that we don't know, even though we have a lot has been written about Caesar, and Caesar has written things himself, we're not entirely sure what he was trying to do, right? So was he trying to make himself a king? We don't know. Was he the most powerful man in Rome? Sure, he absolutely was. He was part of that triumvirate, and the triumvirate existed just to sort of benefit those three men, right? So they could gain economic and political power. But as things turned out, Caesar was kind of the last man standing. Again, did he mean for it to be that way? I don't know. Well, he killed Pompey, but Pompey was probably going to kill him. So, did he mean for it to be that way? Was he trying to make himself a king? Or did he just kind of wind up in the situation where he was the most powerful man and then had to kind of figure out a way to sort of deal with that? We don't know, right? Was he a bad guy? Certainly killed a lot of Gauls, right? But he seems to have done some good for the people of Rome, forgave his enemies, right? And some of the senators, right? Some of the senators who were against him previously with Pompey, he forgave them too. He made a big show of forgiving people, right? Put on, fancy public games for the people, redistributed land, did a lot of good things, right? But were murdered nonetheless, and were murdered by men who were probably powerful and rich and corrupt in their own way, right? I don't know. Is he a hero? Is he a villain? Is Brutus the villain? Is Brutus the hero? Was Rome worth saving? Could Rome have been saved by just murdering Caesar? Yeah. What do you think? What was the Senate's point of view, do you think?
So they want to take this power that he took with power and violence, and he's like for own interest, he's doing so much cool stuff. But that might be open for them to come in. Another point, these bring stability to the world and power. People are like living normally. Why would they do so?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, right? Where do the interests of the senators lie, right? With their kind of own desires for power and money, and to make sure that Julius Caesar doesn't have all the power in Rome. Are they concerned about the regular people of Rome and the things that Caesar is doing for them, or do they not care?
Were they Roman?
Were they
Roman? The Senate?
Yes.
Actual Roman?
Actual Romans.
Not paid off by...
No. The Senate would have been sort of the most prominent citizens in Rome, pretty much all of which would have been elected to public office, former consuls, people who had money and power and influence. And yeah, all Romans. And probably even all original Roman citizens. We said there was that social war that eventually allowed people surrounding Rome, like in the Italy around Rome, to be Roman citizens. But prior to that, it was only people from Rome. So this was like, the Senate would have been full of like hardcore Romans, right? People who were born in Rome, lived in Rome. Yeah. It's tricky. It's an interesting story, right? Certainly interesting enough for Julius Caesar, for William Shakespeare to write a play about it, right? About the struggle of Brutus, Mark Antony, who we'll talk about very shortly because he still has a role to play in this in this story as well. But it's, yeah, there's personal struggles, right, in terms of what's the right thing to do. Should you be more loyal to your country or more loyal to your friend, right? Even if you what if your friend is doing a bad thing? Should you stop him? Or was Caesar actually doing a bad thing, or was he just doing, you know, the best he could in a crazy time? Um, is it better to have a good dictator than a bad democracy? Clearly, they had a bad democracy at the end of the Republic because it wasn't working. So, is it better to have a good dictator in Caesar rather than have a democracy that's not working? Certainly, some of the Roman people thought so because, under Caesar, once Caesar defeated Pompey, the civil war ended, right? People could kind of go back to their regular lives. But then once Caesar was killed, people were like, "Oh God, here we go again!" Right? Now we're gonna have generals fighting in the streets, which is exactly what happened. And so, again, is it better to have one leader who's pretty decent and sort of guaranteeing peace rather than a republic that's supposed to be democratic, but is in a chaotic state? Good questions. Okay, let's take a little break. We'll come back and we'll talk about the sort of aftermath of Julius Caesar and how Rome kind of loses its democracy and loses its republic. Okay, and we are back. So, again, some pretty spectacular events toward the end of the Republic, right? We have the Romans overthrowing their Etruscan kings centuries before and creating this very interesting political organization of a republic. So interesting, in fact, that the Americans and other governments as well, the French, use the sort of template of the Roman Republic to build their own. So France's governmental system is in some ways inspired by the Roman Republic. The American one is heavily inspired by the Roman Republic. The founding fathers were really big into Roman history, and so they tried to take the sort of structure of the Roman Republic, but also knowing how it all ends, tried to create a system that wouldn't allow one person to take too much power. And I think, for the most part, we kind of saw that with Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump was someone who, a US president who would have liked to have more power to do whatever it is he wanted, but there were, there were restrictions in place to limit his power. And so even though Trump had a lot of power and was able to do a lot of things that he wanted to do, there were also a lot of things that he couldn't do, right? And again, the founding fathers of the United States tried to take some lessons from the Roman Republic to make sure that they wouldn't have a Julius Caesar situation, right? They wouldn't have a scenario where one person could take too much power. But again, things are pretty wild and crazy. Caesar is assassinated. And again, when you've got someone with so much power who is suddenly gone, you have a vacuum, right? There's a place where someone used to be powerful and now they are not. And so the question is who or what is going to fill that vacuum? Who is going to claim that power afterwards? And usually what happens is people who are lower, people who have less power, will try to grab that power and insert themselves into that space. And basically that's exactly what happens. Caesar is dead, and prominent, powerful men will try to fight to gain some sort of control. And so, oh yeah, did that. So that brings us to this section. I've got a few pages of the text for you to read here that talks about what happens after the assassination of Caesar. And so you'll see here his heir, the guy who's named in Caesar's will, Gaius Octavius, that his grandnephew, who was like 15 at the time. Gaius Octavius is about 18 years old when, maybe 19, when Caesar is assassinated. So he's going to come out of nowhere and play a role in this story. You'll hear about a second triumvirate, which is similar to the first, but also different. And you'll hear about kind of what happens in this sort of transition period from the death of Caesar to a period where Rome's politics sort of settle down a little bit. Okay, but again, spoiler alert, there'll be more warfare and more killing until things settle down in about, how long is it going to take? 31. It's going to take about 15 years before things settle themselves down. But they will settle down. So I'll give you some time to read this and answer the questions. Then, as usual, we'll talk about it, okay? So we've got Lepidus, Mark Antony, and Octavian. They ally themselves together, and what do they do? Yeah, they kind of avenge Caesar. In what way? Yeah, they kind of go on the hunt for the senators who murdered Caesar, right? So they track all those guys down and kill them, or they commit suicide. I think we heard in the video that that Brutus will commit suicide because he's being hunted by this triumvirate, right? Then what do? They hunt down Caesar's enemies. And they call it a day. Yeah, they divide sort of the Roman world amongst themselves, and I think kind of Octavian takes the sort of Italian part of Rome. I believe Lepidus takes kind of the eastern part of the empire out toward Asia Minor and Turkey, and Mark Antony heads down to Egypt, where he shacks up with Cleopatra as well. They don't explain it too well here, and maybe suffice it to say that eventually the power struggle reasserts itself. So those three guys team up, in an alliance, they drive out all of Caesar's enemies, they divide the Roman world amongst them, but then there's power struggles between them later on. So they kind of push Lepidus out, or Octavian kind of pushes Lepidus out of power, and then he goes to war with Mark Antony. And so those two fight it out. Octavian goes to Egypt to take over, to defeat Mark Antony. It looks like Octavian's army is winning, and then they get that classic scene, where Cleopatra commits suicide with the snake. Have you ever heard about that one? She and Mark Antony commit suicide because Octavian is going to sort of show up and kill them anyway. And so he wins. He triumphs over both of these triumvirs, if you will. And so what happens when Octavian comes back to Rome? Not really. Not really. Here's where it gets really interesting. So here's this guy, okay? Gaius Octavius, or Octavian, or Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. Lots of names, right? But here he is, the heir to Caesar's fortune, the heir to Caesar's name, and to his legacy as well, right? Later he will be portrayed like this, but we'll get to that. Again, he is just a kid and kind of comes out of nowhere, right? He's kind of a nobody, except for once Caesar dies, it's like, oh, here's the heir to Caesar's stuff, this kid. Again, he joins forces with Lepidus and Mark Antony, but eventually they kind of come to a disagreement, and Octavian pushes out Lepidus and leads to the suicide of Mark Antony. But here's Octavius's problem. He has the same problem that Julius Caesar had. Julius Caesar comes back to Rome after defeating Pompey, and he's the kind of the last man standing. He's the most powerful guy in Rome. What to do, right? How to rule, right? And Caesar, you'll recall, he thinks about, maybe I'll just keep getting elected consul, but that seems like a lot of trouble. I can't make myself a king, so maybe I'll get myself appointed dictator perpetuo, right? Dictator in perpetuity, dictator forever, right? And of course that makes the senators nervous, and they assassinate Caesar. Octavius here has the exact same issue, right? He's defeated Lepidus and Mark Antony, comes back to Rome, the most powerful man in Rome, But what can he do? He can't crown himself king. We already know that that's going to be that's a literal dead end because Caesar is now dead. And again, he could remain a military general, but there's always more generals who are fighting it out, right? It would be a constant state of civil war with other generals. What to do, right? What should Octavius do? And this is where it gets quite brilliant. Octavius does this. He goes to the Senate and he says, I have restored the Republic, which sounds familiar because that's what the senators said after they killed Caesar. But he says, I have restored the Republic. But then he says to the senators, he says, but it's your job to maintain it. I give it to you, right? And the senators say, oh no, Octavius, don't leave us. Here, we're going to give you a bunch of honors. And so what they give him is the title of Princeps, Civitatis, that's what it was. Princeps Civitatis, the first citizen of the state. And the Senate has always had a princeps, right? Kind of like the informal leader, if you will. So just like every captain has a team, or every team has a captain, like football teams. On the Senate, the princeps is kind of the captain of the team, right? He's the most sort of senior, the one with the most authoritas, right? The one with the guy who everyone looks up to. And the Senate has always had that as well. They've had a princeps. And so here they give it to Octavian. They say, here, you're the princeps civitatis. You're the first person of the state. You're like the team captain of Rome, if you will. They also give him the title Augustus. Augustus is a title that means sort of blessed or chosen by the gods, right? To be august is to be, chosen by the gods. They also name a month after him. So if you wonder where August comes from him, just like July comes from Julius. Yeah, said it in the video. Actually, a lot of our months are named from the Romans. March is the god of war, right? April, May, where does May come from? June. I forget where they all come from. July comes from Julius. August comes from August. October, I think, comes from, it used to be the 8th month. So octo is the Latin for 8, and I think it used to be the 8th month once upon a time. And December used to be the 10th month, right? So deca is the prefix for 10, and so I think some of those names kind of retained their original title, but some of them were renamed and there were extra months added in, but some of them come from Latin prefixes for the number of the month. Some of them come from Roman gods. Some of them come from Augustus and from Julius Caesar, right? So he gets himself appointed these titles. He gets the title of Augustus. He's the chosen of the gods. He gets the title of Princeps Civitatis, the leader of the state. But he also gets himself a bunch of powers that no one person has had before. And so what he does, I'm just going to move my head over here. What he does is he doesn't crown himself emperor or king, because again, the Romans would never have it, but he kind of puts himself off to the side, right? And he says, I'm the first person of the state, I'm the princeps of the state, and the Senate gives him all these powers, right? So they give him the powers of tribune. So he has permanent powers of tribune to introduce legislation and to veto what the assembly does, right? He controls the treasury. And so if you want to spend money in Rome, you have to go through Octavian, or as he's now being called, Augustus. He becomes the head of the military. Right? So the military swears allegiance to Augustus, not to the state. And again, he's seen as princeps. He's the team captain. He's the person that everyone looks up to. He's the person with the most authoritas, right? The one with the most authority. But is he the emperor? No. Rome has no emperor, right? Is he the king? No. Rome has no king. They have consuls, right? What's that? He's not the president. There's no such thing. Although his powers are very similar to what presidents have. But really what he is he's the symbolic head of the state, right? He's the first person of the state, but he doesn't have an official office. But he has all of these powers that allow him to kind of control the state from behind the scenes. And so all of this Republican structure continues to work, right? People get elected to the assembly continues to pass laws and to vote, magistrates continue to be elected, consuls continue to be elected. Sometimes Augustus is the consul, sometimes he's, or one of the consuls, sometimes he's not. The Senate continues to give advice. All of these things continue to happen, but Augustus is there behind the scenes, right? Influencing and controlling how this works. So he kind of has all the power in Rome, but it doesn't really look that way. It looks like the Republican system is continuing to operate, right? So he very cleverly creates a situation where he doesn't have an official office. He's not the president, he's not the king, he's definitely not the emperor, but he's the one who can influence and control how the republic kind of unfolds, right? He can influence people's political careers. If the assembly passes legislation that he doesn't like, he can veto it, right? Nobody's going to dare cross him because the Roman military has sworn allegiance to him, so there's no way to challenge him the way that generals did in the past. You can't spend any money in Rome without Augustus approving it, so there's that, right? And the Senate kind of goes along with this, and everyone goes along with it because he's kind of the balancing point, right? The Republic had become completely unbalanced and generals were fighting it out and trying to gain power, and he's kind of the one that just sort of holds everything in balance, right? He's got enough power to sort of make everyone do what he wants, but he also has his hands off enough that the system continues to work, right? He's just kind of guiding it where he wants it to go with a gentle nudge here and there. But he doesn't control everything, at least not on paper. And that's where Augustus succeeds where Caesar fails, right? Caesar winds up with all the power in his hands, and the Roman senators won't go for it, and so they kill him. But Augustus manages to have just enough power to control the situation, but not so much that everybody freaks out and wants to get rid of him. It's brilliant, actually. It's really brilliant. But more about that tomorrow because we went a little bit over time. That is it for today. Have a nice afternoon. I will see you tomorrow, okay? Bye.